Hi, I'm Matthew Homer. The 2015 general election is well underway and the candidates remain busy as they try to secure your vote. You may have seen their posters, leaflets, or even spoken to them face to face. But for many people with a learning disability, the way that politicians communicate their messages can be inaccessible or confusing. These voters need candidates to make their campaigns more inclusive so that they can engage with the political debate. For this film, I spoke to different people who have a learning disability and asked them about their experiences of engaging with politics. I also met people who support those with learning disabilities, and I put some of their thoughts and concerns to the candidates themselves. In an age where we are constantly told about voter apathy and cynicism, I want to look at what is being done to help those with a learning disability engage with politics and have a voice in the democratic process. My first stop was at the Grace Air building in Hove. Grace Air is a charity that helps people with learning disabilities lead full and independent lives. Recently, they hosted the latest Hear My Voice event, a campaign that is run by fellow charity MenCap. Here, MenCap's Jason Carlisle explains more about the campaign.
And talk about the Hear My Voice campaign. The campaign itself is two main strands, and that is to engage people with a learning disability in the political process and to educate candidates standing for election on the issues affecting people with a learning disability, their families and carers.
The event opened with a performance by the students at St John's College.
So sit back, relax and enjoy the ride. Thank you!
Everyone has the right to remain safe and not feel threatened. I am Lee Morton, hear my voice.
I accept your opinion. What can I do to change your mind about it?
It was followed by a debate involving parliamentary and council candidates.
Support administered based on what their need is.
It's the first time I've ever been at an event with Caroline Lucas where I've got a cheer.
I'm Caroline Lucas. I'm currently the MP for Brighton Pavilion, and we'll be seeking your...
We will promise is to make sure your voice is heard. Nothing about you without you.
Hello everybody, my name is Kevin Smith and I'm standing as the UKIP parliamentary candidate.
After the event, I talked to some of the voters and candidates. I began by speaking to Rahan. We talked about how politicians could improve the ways in which they communicate to people with learning disabilities.
I suppose if every single party did easy read information, then it'll make life easier.
I put Rahan's points to UKIP's Kevin Smith and to the Green Party's Dick Page. Enough has been done by political parties to engage people with learning disabilities in politics.
I really don't, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, as I say, I'm fairly new into politics, but however, I don't see a lot of information for people with learning disabilities to encourage them to engage in politics.
I think a lot more easy read information should be out there, but also support to explain things not just in an easy read version, but a support person to explain things, and organisations to be disability aware and disability friendly.
So Michelle's question for the panel is what are you going to do for people with learning disabilities? Is that right?
I also met Thello and Michelle. Michelle spoke about why events like the Hear My Voice hustings are so important to her. I mean, why do you think it's important for politicians to listen to what you have to say? Why do you think it's important?
Yeah, because what happened, it makes me learn, because to learn things in my head, but that's what I have to learn about voting and all this voting things. I have to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I went to one yesterday, I was talking about that, went all the way around the table, got all these things yesterday, and that was so busy.
There was a really dynamic and positive atmosphere at the Hear My Voice event, and it was encouraging to see that it was so well attended. I travelled to the office of Brighton and Hove Speak Out. This is an advocacy group for people with learning disabilities. I would later be talking to many people who use Speak Out's different services. Before that, I met up with Conservative candidate Graham Cox. That honesty necessarily.
No, I suspect you're right. And it's interesting you should say, as someone without a learning disability, that actually it made for a more informative exchange of views than the normal exchange of figures and weasel words from politicians. So I think there might be a lesson in that, that we could all look at. You never know, a sort of hustings conducted on that basis in national primetime television might actually prove to be more informative to the wider public as well, if you cut out all the cliches and the politics speak.
Graham also spoke about the improvements that have been made to his party's literature since working with groups like Grace Air, MenCap and Speak Out.
In them that actually keeping our message simple, making it easy read, not only benefits people with learning disabilities, but actually probably benefits the population as a whole. So it certainly doesn't add any more expense. And it's good that we're reminded to think of it, but I fully accept we're not there yet. We've still got quite a way to go, and it's so easy to forget and to revert to sort of old practice and old behaviour. So Grace Air and MenCap and so on and Speak Out all need to keep on our case.
Oh, definitely.
And from that, I learnt about the importance of making sure that our literature, for example, is properly focused, and there's a nice opportunity to flag the special.
Having accessible literature is vital in helping people with learning disabilities engage with politics. Hannah is involved in Speak Out's Being Heard in Government group. She told me how the Green Party's Caroline Lucas collaborated with the group to design easy read literature. One of the things I remember from that is Caroline Lucas. She was talking about her leaflets and things like that.
Yeah.
And I remember you guys. I think was it yourselves that were showing them? Why is it so important that the literature is in a kind of format which is easy to understand?
Because then it includes everyone.
Yeah.
You're not kind of going, or someone with a learning disability can't do it because they can't read it.
Yeah, and we it's probably a silly question from me, but do you find that there's a lot of material from other parties which is just it's just
Green's the only one that I can actually understand.
Yeah.
But actually, on the bonus side, we were actually helping Caroline Lucas to actually design it.
So she kind of worked with you. Yeah. When you have you voted in the past? You've not. So this would be the first time.
Last time I tried to vote, the last time I was in, gave me the polling card, is it?
I think so, yeah.
On the day of the vote.
Okay.
And it was a postal vote.
Okay.
And I had no help to read it all. I ticked one because I knew that person.
Yeah. Hannah's experience of receiving the polling card late from one of her carers highlights another important point. This is for those who support people with learning disabilities to have an interest in politics too. Ben benefited from his support worker having such an interest, and this saw him attend an event hosted by Caroline Lucas. You're speaking about some really interesting things that you spoke to Caroline about. Why do you think it's important that politicians listen to what you have to say?
Well, it's just that, you see, with people with learning difficulties, they're very special people, and I just think that they should be offered the chance to to live independently and try and get more suitable housing.
Like Hannah, Ian is involved in the Being Heard in Government group. During our conversation, Ian expressed his concerns about the allocation of funds from the local council.
What they are doing is actually taking services away from people with learning difficulties to save that money.
And what services do you think they might get rid of or reduce funding in, really?
Things like day services. Government cuts are like Jenga.
Jenga? Oh,
yes.
The game?
Yes.
Okay.
You take day services for people with learning difficulties, and you take other services for people with learning difficulties, and it falls down.
That's a really good comparison, actually. Yeah, it's very After spending the day at Speak Out, I met the Labour candidate for Brighton Kemp Town, Nancy Platt. I started by asking Nancy if there was a real concern that people with learning disabilities could be overlooked in the political process.
I think there is a real risk that people get left out of the political process, and that if it's not understandable and if we don't provide ways of people being able to make their views known, that they just feel completely left out and disengaged, and then they don't vote, which means they also don't have a voice in Parliament. So we had some people with learning disabilities come along to my event for disabled people. It's really great that some of them have come along tonight as well, because I feel now this is the second or third time we've met, so they really are getting to have a voice, and I'm really keen to represent them if I get elected in Parliament.
That's one of the campaigns running is MenCap's the Hear My Voice campaign. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that campaign, and also whether as a society is there more we can do to make sort of politics and the election more inclusive to more people, really.
I think campaigns like the MenCap one have been really successful because it's got everybody talking about the issues. It's raised the profile, so lots of us that are involved in standing for election get incredibly busy at this time of year. It's quite hard for organisations and issues to cut through sometimes. I think that campaign has worked really well. It has cut through. We've now got people with learning disabilities turning up to our events, we're turning up to their events, so there's a real process of engagement starting to happen. I'm now more understanding of their issues, and I hope that they feel they can come forward and that I'm approachable and they can express their views to me, because if I get elected to Parliament, I want to be a listening MP.
Having spoken to Nancy about her experience of Hear My Voice, I met up with MenCap's Jason Carlisle to learn more about this campaign.
Well, we're hoping that we'll get more people with a learning disability voting at this election than in any other previous election. And when the election is over and whatever mix-up of parties announce that they're going to form a government, during Learning Disability Week, which is the third week of June, on the Friday, which is Constituency Office Day, we'll be going around to selected MPs that have been elected, candidates that have been elected that have promised to listen during our election campaign, our Hear My Voice campaign, and we'll be going there with groups of people with learning disabilities on that Friday, the third week in June, to the constituency surgeries and saying, you said you'll listen, now listen, and this is what we've got to say. So that's how we'll be following it up, and we hope to sort of follow it up with when council elections are on, or unitary authority elections and things like European, just to try and keep the momentum going.
Oh, definitely. I also raised a point that was inspired by my chat with Ian. That is whether potential cuts to support services could have a negative effect on democracy in the country.
It's hard to say. We predict more cuts in the next Parliament, but we don't see how much further that things can be cut within learning disability services. And they're only a fraction of adult social care budgets anyway, but they always seem to be the first to go. And we predict that there'll be some more, and that will undoubtedly have an effect on people's access to vote and access to support for democracy and things like that, to support them in the democratic process. if people can't go along to advocacy groups like Speak Out or things like that, if there's no way that they can do that anymore, or their own funding and personal budgets affect whether they can go or not, or if Speak Out's budget gets cut, something like that, then, or MenCap doesn't have, we're not the richest charity in the world, so we can only run these things as much as we can, so if we have less coming in as well, we can't do it. If there's less coming from councils and central government, then inevitably it will be affected, but we will do our very best to make sure that people are engaged one way or another.
Liberal Democrat candidate Paul Chandler was also at the Grace Air hustings. So what did Paul think about the event? And you were saying at the beginning that it was one of the better events you've been to. I mean, is that because of the atmosphere and the...
Yeah, it was not only the atmosphere, but as you say, the surprising questions. They were really quite personal questions and difficult to answer.
There are many political issues that have a particular impact on the lives of people with learning disabilities. A real strength of the work by MenCap and Speak Out is how they support people to have an active engagement with those issues. I talked about the importance of this with Paul.
Quite often it's one single issue that really motivates somebody to get involved. Somebody who wants to have, for example, a pedestrian crossing on their road. I have started a campaign to get one when I was a local councillor, not in Brighton. And a lot of people got involved because they felt very strongly that they needed a pedestrian crossing near their home. And we got the pedestrian crossing, and a lot of those people stayed engaged and active. So yeah, it's fine. Any way that people get involved, because once every 5 years, it's the only time that we get a real choice.
Dawn Thorpe is a project worker at Speak Out. Dawn has been involved in a number of initiatives to encourage engagement between politicians and people with learning disabilities. Despite improvements in the area, I asked Dawn whether she felt that enough was being done to involve those with learning disabilities in politics.
No, I don't think enough is being done, and I don't think the drive, even though that we've had really, really positive results down here, and I think everything that we've done, speaking to local politicians about accessible information and the hustings event, has been so positive. It's been, 5 organisations working together and working very collaboratively with the politicians as well, with all the parties, and a real passion to make that happen. But none of that came from the politicians. And interestingly, since the change of voter registration, where people were very, very, very clued up on the fact that Brighton and Hove has a high population of students who may fall off the voter registration. Brighton and Hove has 6,000 people with a learning disability. Had those 6,000, and I think the MenCap figures, I might be wrong, but the MenCap figures are something like 30% of people with learning disabilities registered to vote in the last election, and only 10% of them voted, I think. Given that, and you think 6,000 people in the city have a learning disability, if 6,000 people, or even a percentage of those people were to vote, that would have changed the election. Caroline Lucas won the election last time with only 1,200 votes. So only a small percentage of the people with learning disabilities in Brighton Hove would need to vote to absolutely change the way that the election falls.
With this in mind, does Dawn think things will improve significantly by the next election?
Obviously it will come from us, and I think the problem is that in most movements, in most political movements or human rights movements, change comes when the people themselves have a voice, and the problem is that a lot of people with learning disabilities don't have a voice, and they do rely on other people engaging with them to enable them to have a voice. And I think that's where the delays happened, is that there hasn't been that sort of voice. And I think those things are changing, because there are organisations in Leeds like Change which are just pushing those boundaries. MenCap are pushing those boundaries, and smaller organisations like us on a local level, you do what you can locally. I don't know what effect that has nationally.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of... As seen from the Hear My Voice hustings and the work completed by Speak Out, there have been many successful initiatives to help people with learning disabilities become involved in politics. Despite these achievements, more needs to be done. Basic steps like the availability of support at the ballot box would create significant improvements. It could also mean the difference between someone casting their vote or them not having a say in who governs the country. It remains vital that political parties and government accommodate and support people with learning disabilities. This will enable more individuals to have a greater say on the issues that affect their lives. Candidates and MPs run the risk of losing thousands of votes if they do not play their part in making politics more inclusive. More worryingly, society could lose the ideas, the knowledge and experience of those people who are being overlooked. It is essential that politics is open to all and that everyone has the opportunity to be heard. This is fundamental for the standard and the integrity of our democracy.
Voting, how to vote people in this general election. Voting, how to vote people in this general election.